7 times László Várkonyi climbed Everest without oxygen, and 7 times he turned back. In 2002, he stopped 100 meters from the summit, at an elevation of 8,750. That is still the Hungarian record. A man who never once in his life crossed the line between calculation and gamble did not die on a summit push, and not in the death zone. On the 26th of April, 2010, on the gentlest stretch of the route to the North Col, a small serac collapsed and buried him, 3 weeks before the planned summit attempt. His partner, Dávid Klein, was walking 15 meters ahead and survived. This is a story about how 39 years of flawless decisions cannot protect you from 15 seconds of chance. In 1956, a boy is born in Hungary who the entire mountaineering world will later know by a single name: Konyi. László Várkonyi starts climbing at 15 in the high Tatras, where Czech alpinists teach him basic rock and ice skills. For a Hungarian teenager in the early 70s, this is the only way into the world of mountains. Low, harsh, technically demanding walls on the border of Slovakia. He masters them quickly. By 22, the Tatras have become too small for him, and in 1978, Várkonyi finds himself in the Caucasus, summiting Elbrus at 5,642 meters and completing several 4,000ers. For a young electrical engineer from a country with no high mountains of its own, this is a serious leap. The early 80s open up the Soviet system of international mountaineering camps, and Várkonyi seizes every opportunity. In the Pamirs, he summits Peak Lenin and Peak Korzenevskaya, both above 7,000 meters. In the Tian Shan, he climbs Khan Tengri. In 1982, he travels to Mongolia, where he traverses 4 summits in the Munkh Khair Khan range. A year later, at the International Pamir Camp, he crosses the plateau on the route to peak communism at roughly 6,500 meters. By 30, the geography of his ascents covers half a continent: the Tatras, the Caucasus, the Pamirs, the Tian Shan, Mongolia. And in every one of these places, he climbs in the style that will become his signature: maximum self-reliance, minimum dependence on anyone else's help, a willingness to carry more, walk longer, and endure longer than anyone around him. It is here, on these expeditions, that he earns the nickname Konyi, short as a nod and just as reliable. It will stay with him until his last day. The nickname sticks, but his ambitions grow faster than his reputation. By early 1984, Várkonyi already understands that Soviet camps are a ceiling beyond which a different kind of alpinism begins. Expeditionary, autonomous, aimed at summits no Hungarian has ever reached. On the 11th of January, together with expedition leader Sándor Nagy, he stands on the summit of Aconcagua, 6,962 meters, the highest point in South America. It is the first Hungarian ascent of that mountain. For a small mountaineering nation, squeezed between the plains of Pannonia, reaching the highest peak in the Western Hemisphere is an event that changes the scale of what seems possible. 3 years later, Várkonyi returns to the Andes, and in a single expedition climbs 5 peaks ranging from 5,800 to 6,800 meters. All 5 are first Hungarian ascents. By 30, his resume includes mountain ranges that most European alpinists never get through in an entire career, from the high Tatras to the Andes. He moves slowly and heavy, not because he cannot do otherwise, but because he deliberately builds himself for multi-day autonomous pushes where there are no Sherpas, no supply drops, no helicopters. Where others optimize weight, he takes extra: an extra rope, an extra day of food, an extra set of batteries. This habit of excessive self-sufficiency looks archaic in the age of lightweight expeditions, but it is precisely what will later allow him to operate on Everest in conditions where most climbers depend on someone else's infrastructure. But Aconcagua and the Andean 6,000ers are still just a warm-up. In the fall of 1987, Várkonyi's attention turns to the goal that will define everything ahead: the 8,000ers of the Himalayas. Hungarian alpinism up to this point has never gone above 7,500 meters. Várkonyi intends to change that, and the team for the first attempt is already assembled. The team heads to Tibet in the fall of that same 1987. The target is Shisha Pangma, 8,027 meters, the lowest of the 14 8,000ers on the planet, but for Hungary, a completely uncharted altitude. This is the first Hungarian expedition to a summit above 8,000 meters, and Várkonyi, 31 years old, is one of the key members. On the 7th of October, he stands at the highest point reached by the team. The expedition receives official certificates from the Chinese Mountaineering Association confirming the summit. Back home, the team is awarded Hungary's Gold Sports Medal for distinguished service. For the country, it is a breakthrough. Hungarians have climbed an 8,000er for the first time. But decades later, the success comes under question. Himalayan statistician Eberhard Jurgalski, analyzing the expedition's summit photographs, concludes that the team reached not the main summit of Sisa-Pangma at 8,027 meters, but only the central summit at 8,008. The difference is 19 meters in altitude and a few hundred meters along the ridge. But in the world of high-altitude mountaineering, that is the difference between a recognized and an unrecognized ascent. Expedition leader Sándor Nagy publicly and sharply rejects Jurgalski's findings, calling the doubts infinitely immoral toward the two deceased participants and their families. The Hungarian database M-8-1000-.-HU records the ascent as the central summit. Most international databases do the same. The question remains open to this day and will probably never be settled for good. For Várkonyi, Sisa-Pangma becomes his first experience working at an altitude where there is a third as much oxygen as at sea level, and at the same time, his first encounter with how easily the line between success and its contestation turns into a gap that cannot be crossed after the fact. He will remember that. 3 years later, in October of 1990, Várkonyi stands on a summit no one will dispute, Cho-Oyu, 8,201 meters, the sixth highest mountain in the world. It is the first Hungarian ascent, and for Várkonyi, the only fully confirmed 8,000er of his entire career. A fact that will later look like a paradox. The man who climbed without oxygen higher than any Hungarian in history officially stood on just one summit above 8,000 meters. Cho-Oyu was supposed to be the start of a series. It became the only point. But the defining event in Várkonyi's life turns out to be not the summit of 1990, but the failure 6 years later. In 1996, he joins the first Hungarian expedition to Everest, the north side, the Tibetan route. For a man who by 40 has climbed mountain ranges from the Tatras to the Andes, his first sight of Everest from the North Base Camp is a moment that resets the scale. Everything he had seen before, the Pamirs, the Tian Shan, the Andes, was preparation for a mountain that exists in another dimension. Várkonyi climbs to 7,800 meters without supplemental oxygen. No one on the Hungarian team reaches the summit, but that no longer matters. He has found his mountain. That very same season, on the opposite side of Everest, becomes one of the darkest in the history of mountaineering. A May storm engulfs the south route and claims 8 lives, among them the leaders of commercial expeditions Rob Hall and Scott Fisher. This disaster will end up in books and on screens, forever changing how the world views high-altitude alpinism. Várkonyi is on the other side of the mountain, but the news reaches base camp. Everest shows both its faces at once, a pull that cannot be explained and a price that cannot be predicted. On the Hungarian expedition alongside Várkonyi is Zsolt Eros, a man who 6 years later will become the first citizen of Hungary to stand on the summit of Everest. But in 1996, both return empty-handed. Várkonyi would later recall that he fell in love with Everest right then and there, at first sight, completely and irreversibly. Not with the summit, but with the mountain itself. And it is here, on the north side, that he formulates the principle he will never once abandon over 14 years, only without oxygen. For him, a summit with a bottle and a summit without a bottle are two entirely different ascents. He chooses the second and accepts everything that follows from it. What follows from that choice is, above all, patience. In 1999, Várkonyi returns to Everest and climbs to 8,650 meters without oxygen. 200 vertical meters remain to the summit. He turns around. A year later, Everest again, without oxygen again, this time to 8,400, back again. Each turnaround is not a collapse or a failure, but a decision. Conditions have ceased to be acceptable. The safety margin is gone, so down. For a climber capable of working at that altitude, the temptation to continue is enormous. The summit is already visible. The weather might improve in an hour. An oxygen bottle would solve everything in 20 minutes. Várkonyi gives in not once. In 2001, he tries the most ambitious option, the Kangshung Face, the east wall of Everest, one of the most difficult routes on the mountain. Avalanche danger stops the team at just 6,500 meters. The paradox, the most serious route, the earliest turnaround point. Kangshung does not forgive hopes of improvement. There, the decision must be made quickly and finally. Várkonyi makes it without hesitation. By the spring of 2002, he has 4 attempts on Everest behind him, with not a single compromise on oxygen and not a single summit. Later, in 2003, he will reach 8,005 meters on Gesherbrum 2, without oxygen, 30 meters from the top, and again turn back. A pattern takes shape that defines him as a climber more precisely than any record. The closer the goal, the stricter the discipline of refusal. Others see in this a tragedy of unfulfillment. Várkonyi sees a system in which an accurate assessment of one's own limits matters more than any result. And it is precisely this system that, in the spring of 2002, will carry him to an altitude no Hungarian has ever reached. In the spring of 2002, Várkonyi takes the Nepalese normal route, the south side, the classic path through the South Col, without supplemental oxygen, without high-altitude porters on the upper camps, in an alpine style that by now has become the only way he will climb. He reaches the south summit, 8,750 meters. From here, the main summit of Everest is less than 100 vertical meters away, a narrow ridge that in good weather takes an hour to an hour and a half. But the weather is not good. Várkonyi assesses the conditions, assesses his own state, and makes the decision he has already made 4 times before. He turns around. 8,750 meters without oxygen becomes the Hungarian altitude record. That record has not been broken to this day. No Hungarian mountaineer has climbed higher without bottled oxygen. In that same expedition, on the 25th of May, Zsolt Eros reaches the summit of Everest, the man Várkonyi had been climbing with as far back as 1996. Eros becomes the first citizen of Hungary on the highest point on Earth. But on the final stretch, he uses supplemental oxygen. The contrast is inevitable and obvious to the entire Hungarian mountaineering community. Eros gets the glory of the first ascent and a state award. Várkonyi gets a record and a blank line in the summit register. One stood at the very top, but breathed from a bottle. The other breathed only air, but never stood at the very top. Várkonyi reacts the way he reacts to everything, without complaint and without compromise. When his name is mistakenly entered into the Everest summit register, he himself demands it be removed. The error is corrected at his own initiative. For a man who has spent 6 years trying to reach that summit, this kind of gesture is not modesty, but a principle taken to its absolute. A summit you did not stand on is not your summit, even if someone credited it to you. 5 years pass between the record and the next serious attempt. In 2007, Várkonyi returns to Everest with the man who will become his last expedition partner, Dávid Klein. They take the North Ridge from the Tibetan side, without oxygen, and climb to 8,600 meters. Here, both assess the situation. There is not enough time for a safe ascent to the summit and return. Klein decides to descend. Várkonyi does not. He stays alone above 8,000 meters. The death zone, as alpinists call the altitude where the human body begins to break down faster than it can recover. Here, every breath delivers a third of what a person gets at sea level. Muscles run on the last of their energy, and the brain gradually loses its capacity for clear thinking. Most climbers try to spend as little time as possible in this zone. Up to the summit and immediately down, the clock measured in hours. Várkonyi spends 2 days here, alone, waiting for a weather window that would allow a solo summit push. The window does not open. He tries anyway, climbing to 8,500 meters, but the wind picks up, and signs of frostbite appear on his hands. Only then does he descend. Hungarian climber Zsendro Szabolcs, commenting on this episode years later, will say bluntly, "For most people in the mountains, this is not bravery, but recklessness. At that altitude, the body burns through its reserves at a catastrophic rate. But Várkonyi decided, and Várkonyi came back alive. At 51, his body is still capable of doing what the bodies of people 20 years younger cannot. By this point, his reputation in Everest Base Camp has long extended beyond the Hungarian team. International expeditions know him as the man who fixes everything: generators, chargers, laptops, inverters. An electrical engineer by training, he can deliver a lecture on lasers and coherent radiation at 7,000 meters and then solder a broken contact in someone else's battery. Among the Sherpas, there is a story that Várkonyi once walked 120 kilometers on foot from Kathmandu in 3 days, with a 50-kilogram pack on his back. He is personally acquainted with Reinhold Messner and Hans Kammerlander, the men who defined the very concept of oxygen-free high-altitude alpinism. It is on this expedition that the Várkonyi-Klein partnership fully takes shape. Two people who climb differently, Klein more cautious, Várkonyi more stubborn, but who trust each other at an altitude where trust is worth more than oxygen. This partnership will hold for 3 years, until the very end. The partnership returns to Everest just a year later. But in 2008, the mountain does not belong to climbers. The Beijing Olympics turns Everest into a political stage. China organizes the delivery of the Olympic torch to the summit and closes the north side to all foreign expeditions. Várkonyi and Klein have come to the Tibetan side and discovered that they are simply not allowed on the mountain. For the first time in 12 years of attempts, Everest is closed not by weather, not by avalanches, and not by his own body, but by a decision made by officials in Beijing. They switch to the Nepalese side, but lose weeks on logistics and re-permitting. By the time they manage to start climbing, the calendar reads May 10th. In a normal season, that is already summit push time, not the beginning of acclimatization. The time window has been squeezed to its limit. Várkonyi and Klein climb to the South Col at 7,950 meters without oxygen, but going further is pointless. The season is effectively lost. They turn around. The 7th attempt in 12 years. The 7th refusal. Not a single compromise on oxygen, not a single summit. Várkonyi is 52 years old. Physiology is still on his side. He remains capable of functioning above 8,000 meters, which in itself is a rarity at any age. But the arithmetic is relentless. Every next expedition demands money, sponsors, months of preparation, permits, logistics. The body that currently allows him to spend 2 days in the death zone may not allow it 5 years from now. The window of opportunity that nature holds open for oxygen-free alpinism on Everest narrows with every passing year. Várkonyi understands this. The next attempt may be the last one for which he has enough of everything at once: health, time, resources, and stubbornness. That understanding defines everything that happens in early 2010. Várkonyi and Klein assemble an expedition that both of them see as the decisive one. The sponsor is the Dreyer Brewery, hence the official name, Dreyer 24 Everest Expedition. The goal is stated without hedging: the first Hungarian oxygen-free ascent of Everest. Before departure, Klein tells reporters, "Our goal is to dot the I." Várkonyi prepares differently. He does not like the internet, rarely types, keeps no blog, and records no video messages. But before the flight, he sends a friend a short message, a quote from the Hungarian rock band Omega: "Ha nem megiek, nem vagyok." If I do not go, I do not exist. And one more line, in another letter: "I hope I will be able to sing, above me, nothing but clear sky." This is not a farewell and not a premonition. It is the formula by which he has lived his entire life. Mountains are not a hobby, not a sport, and not a record. Mountains are the thing without which he is not. Várkonyi comes to this expedition with experience no one else in Hungary possesses. For one of his previous solo attempts on Everest, friends say he hid a massive supply of provisions in a crevasse along the route: ham, canned food, and 300 meters of rope left over from a prior expedition. A stash in the glacier as a guarantee of a week's autonomy on a mountain where most climbers depend on Sherpas and commercial supply runs. His backpack, 30 years old, battered, enormous, is always twice the size of anyone else's. Friends joke that it is a mystery how anyone can move vertically with it at all. Várkonyi moves, slowly, heavily, but with a margin that covers any contingency. The expedition departs Budapest at the end of March. On the 3rd of April, Várkonyi and Klein cross the Chinese border, planning to leave the country on the 8th of June via Nepal. The route is the north side, through the Tibetan base camp. Logistics are handled by Asian Trekking. The expedition initially includes 3 Hungarians, but the third member leaves the team before the active phase begins and returns home via Kathmandu. The reasons are not disclosed in any available source. A week before the tragedy, Várkonyi calls from base camp at 5,300 meters. He says there were some minor stomach issues, but everything is fine. They are continuing to build the chain of camps, and he adds a phrase that will later sound different from how he meant it. I am going to disappear for a while now. Várkonyi and Klein remain alone on the north side of Everest. The planned summit push is roughly 3 weeks away. On the 26th of April, 2010, Várkonyi and Klein wake up at the North Col, 7,000 meters above sea level. This is not a summit push. They are on an acclimatization rotation, a standard procedure in which climbers ascend to altitude, spend time there, and descend so the body can adjust to thinner air. The planned summit window is mid-May, 3 weeks out. Today is a working day, routine, intermediate. In the morning, they try to climb toward Camp 2 at 7,800 meters, but after 200 meters, they turn around. The wind is too strong. At the same time, they notice that above 7,000 meters, there is not a single person visible on the entire route. For experienced alpinists, this is a readable signal. If no one else is going up, conditions above are worse than they look from below. They read this signal correctly and make the decision to descend to advanced base camp at 6,400 meters. More oxygen there, a chance to rest properly and recover before the next rotation. The descent begins in good weather. The wind that drove them from above is not felt down here. The mood is light. Acclimatization is on schedule. Bodies are working. The expedition is on track. Klein walks ahead, Várkonyi a little behind. Along the way, they stop to photograph the ice landscape. Klein will later say that this particular stop changed everything, but then immediately cut himself off. Looking for causes after the fact is a pointless exercise. They traverse one of the gentlest sections of the route to the North Col, a snowy slope with a slight incline, left to right. Below them, a crevasse. Above them, an ice wall, a serac. The stretch is so flat and familiar that hundreds of people cross it every season, barely slowing down. Everything is normal. Everything is calm. The clock reads 12:20. At 12:20 local time, a small serac in the middle section of the route to the North Col splits apart. Not a massive collapse, not a catastrophic failure of an entire ice wall. Just a piece of ice that had held for decades stops holding. The ice flow covers a front roughly 30 meters wide. By Everest standards, it is a minor incident. By the standards of 2 people who happen to be in its path, it is absolute. Klein hears the sound first. A sharp, muffled crack, as if something is bursting inside the mountain. He turns around. For a fraction of a second, their eyes meet. His and Várkonyi's, 15 to 20 meters behind. Klein shouts something. Later, at the press conference in Budapest, he will say he does not remember what. In the next instant, he is running down the slope, trying to get out of the fall zone. A block of ice catches up with him, strikes him, and throws him over the edge of the crevasse. Klein falls but does not reach the bottom. A scrap of fixed rope or a knot on it stops him on a vertical fern wall, roughly 20 meters above the ground. He hangs there, alive, with a torn backpack and a damaged harness. From 100 meters below, Jamie McGuinness sees everything. A New Zealand alpinist, founder of Project Himalaya. He is photographing the ice wall at the moment of collapse. From his vantage point, the picture is completely clear. The ice flow hits both men, but differently. Klein is flung sideways. The ice strikes a glancing blow, knocks him off his feet, and throws him over the edge. On Várkonyi, the blocks collapse from directly above, a direct hit. He is swept into the crevasse. The crevasse fills with ice debris. Fixed ropes along a stretch of 30 to 50 meters are ripped from the slope. An American expedition, positioned even farther away, captures the collapse on video. On the route, silence, the dust of settling ice, and Klein hanging on the wall, calling his partner by name. He waits for Várkonyi to appear from above, look down, and start acting, the way he always did when something went wrong. Várkonyi does not appear. Minutes drag on, and Klein keeps calling. No answer. Finally, Sherpas reach him from below. They lower a rope, pull him up, and walk him back to camp. Klein walks on his own, His right arm is bruised in several places. The backpack is torn, the harness damaged. A Mexican doctor who happens to be in camp treats the injuries on site. Klein takes painkillers. In camp, McGuinness finds him. The New Zealander shows Klein the photographs taken at the moment of collapse. Until this point, Klein still allowed for the possibility that his partner might have been outside the impact zone. The distance between them had given him hope. The photographs closed that hope. Várkonyi took a direct hit and was swept into the crevasse. Klein lost his satellite phone in the fall. He takes Várkonyi's phone, the only one left, and contacts the family and expedition coordinator, Agnes Hajnal. Klein delivers a single sentence. "My friend László Várkonyi is dead. I was lucky. A safety rope held me." The search operation begins immediately, but every hour makes it more dangerous. The ice in the collapse zone is unstable. The crevasse into which Várkonyi was swept is buried under debris of unknown depth. The weather deteriorates. New minor collapses occur in the same area, and the route the rescuers would need to take becomes a trap itself. The search continues for 2.5 days. On the 29th of April, Chinese authorities, through the Hungarian consulate in Beijing, officially call off the operation and declare Várkonyi dead. The basis: throughout the entire search, he was found neither alive nor dead, and the ice conditions do not allow continuation without risk to the rescuers. Significantly later, after the season has ended, the Secretary General of the Chinese Tibet Mountaineering Association will report that the body was found at 6,800 meters, but was not physically evacuated. Várkonyi becomes the second Hungarian to die on Everest, after Sándor Gardos, who fell on the north side in 2001. Klein leaves the mountain and makes his way to Kathmandu. On the 11th of May, 2010, he stands before journalists in Budapest with a battered arm, without his partner, and with the need to explain what cannot be explained, why one survived and the other did not, when 15 meters separated them. He speaks slowly and precisely. He reconstructs the timeline, the acclimatization rotation, the decision to descend, the wind above, the silence below, the stop for photographs, the traverse of the gentle slope. Then the crack, the glance back, the run downhill, the impact, the fall, the rope that held, and silence where Várkonyi had just been standing. Klein describes the moment when the Sherpas pulled him up, and he still hoped his partner was alive and taking action somewhere nearby, and the moment when McGuinness showed him the photographs that made clear there was nothing to hope for. The key sentence of the press conference, the one every Hungarian source will later quote, "In every attempt on the summit, there is something that could have been done differently, but we did not make a mistake." And immediately after, "Everything would have been different if we had not stopped to take photographs on the way down." But thoughts like that are pointless. Two sentences that contain everything, both the professional analysis and the impossibility of accepting randomness as a cause. Klein says he will visit Várkonyi's family the next day. He expresses hope that his partner will be remembered as he was, a strong, life-loving person for whom mountains were not a series of records but a way of life. He confirms he will return to Everest, but not this year. Before leaving Tibet, Klein carves Várkonyi's name into a flat stone and places it among the memorial cairns on the hill near the North Base camp. The stone stands beside the memorial markers for Sándor Gardos and Austrian Reinhard Vlasic, 3 lives given to the same mountain from the same side over 15 years. A posthumous award for contribution to Hungarian sport is given to Várkonyi and presented to his wife Beata by the State Secretary for Sport. After Budapest, Klein returns to the mountains, but not to his former life. In one interview, he will say, "At least 3 years passed before I processed his death. 3 years is not a gap between expeditions. It is the time during which a man accustomed to making decisions at 8,000 meters cannot cope with one decision at sea level. How to go on living without the partner who was beside him at every critical moment of recent years." Klein continues climbing, meets people, goes to altitude. But an expedition partner, the kind you can share not just a rope team with, but also the silence of a bivouac, an assessment of risk in the fog, and the decision to turn around 200 meters from the summit, that kind of person he does not have. "For a long time, I could not open up to others," he will admit later. "Of course I got to know people, climbed with some of them, but a real expedition partner was not there. Konyi is the first person after whom I was able to imagine someone new beside me. That someone new turns out to be Szilárd Szuhajda, a former English teacher, who by then has already established himself as one of Hungary's most promising high-altitude climbers. They grow close on an expedition to K2, the second highest mountain in the world. The attempt ends in retreat due to an avalanche, but it is on K2 that something emerges between them that Klein could not find for 3 years, trust sufficient for a rope team. In 2019, Szuhajda becomes the first Hungarian on the summit of K2 without oxygen. The line stretches further and breaks again. In May of 2023, Szuhajda sets out on a solo summit push on Everest without oxygen. He climbs to 8,780 meters, roughly the same altitude where 21 years earlier, Várkonyi had turned around. Szuhajda does not turn around. He disappears near the Hillary Step. His body has not been found. His altitude mark is formally 30 meters higher than Várkonyi's record. But in mountaineering, a record is only recognized upon a safe return, and the record remains with Várkonyi. 3 Hungarian climbers, Várkonyi, Klein, Szuhajda, pursued the same dream. Everest without oxygen. Várkonyi died before reaching the summit push. Szuhajda died on the summit push. Klein survived and carries both losses within him. Várkonyi did not die on a summit attempt, and not in the death zone. Not because of an error in judgment, not because he overestimated his strength, not because the stubbornness that defined him finally overruled his discipline. He died on one of the gentlest and most technically straightforward sections of the route to the North Col during a routine acclimatization descent, 3 weeks before the planned summit push. The serac that collapsed was small, 30 meters of front. Klein was thrown aside and hung on a rope. Várkonyi was buried from above and swept into a crevasse. The difference between life and death. A few steps and a few seconds. No more. Over 39 years in the mountains, Várkonyi built a system in which every decision was governed by one criterion. Can I get back? 7 times he turned around on Everest, once 100 meters from the summit. He did not use supplemental oxygen, but he never crossed the line beyond which return became a matter of luck. Everything he did in the mountains was subordinate to a principle he never once violated. Honesty before the mountain matters more than the summit. But on the 26th of April, 2010, the principle did not matter. The serac collapsed not because someone made a mistake. It collapsed because ice is ice, and one day it stops holding. Alpinists call it the icefall lottery. You can cross the same stretch 100 times, and 100 times nothing happens. And on the 101st time, it does. No experience, no caution, and no physical fitness can override that arithmetic. Várkonyi's friend, climber Sandro Szabolcs, said after his death, "Everything happened the way it was supposed to. Várkonyi found peace in the place he had always been striving toward." In 2024, the Hungarian television channel Spectrum released a 6-part documentary called Minek ment oda. Why did he go there? The 4th episode is dedicated to Várkonyi. The title is a question asked by people who have never gone to the mountains. Várkonyi answered it 39 years before anyone thought to ask. Hanem megiek, nem vagyok. If I do not go, I do not exist. His Hungarian record without oxygen, 8,750 meters, has not been broken.